welcome, Karuppa. Thank you very much for being on this show. He is a product manager at Google, an author, and a YouTuber. So, Karuppa, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for inviting me. And yeah, you pretty much summarized the three things that would probably be what I would describe myself right now is my day, I work at Google as a product manager on a team called Firebase, which is really around how to make app developers build apps without having to worry about all the various complexities involved, such as the backend, databases, authentication, and so on. But in the evenings, when I have free time, I spend a lot of time writing. I've been blogging and writing about web development and just teaching developers how to basically take advantage of all the cool things the web has since almost 1998 now. So it's been more than 25, 24 years of basically just day in and day out writing little bits and pieces of code and explaining it. And now it's translated to books and YouTube videos, but it's a hobby of mine. And so those are the kind of two halves of the world that kind of combine and feed into each other, which we might touch upon later during our chat.
Awesome. That's very interesting. So, the first question that I have for you is, tell us a bit more about your product manager or product management journey. What does you do as a product manager, and how did you get started to become a product manager?
Yeah. In many ways, I like to describe myself as an accidental product manager in that I never set out with the goal of becoming a PM and doing what the traditional PM job involves. I got into product management indirectly. I started blogging a long time ago, and through that, I had to wear multiple hats. Part of it was really just the work of developing and writing code and getting things up and running. But the part that actually excited me the more was really that how do you figure out what to build next? How do you analyze what people want? How do you understand their pain points and figure out how we can solve them? And those were all things that I had to do as part of my side projects. But when the opportunity came on for me to consider which career path I wanted to take, I really liked the problem area of just working with customers, working with people, and figuring out how we can translate what they say and sometimes don't say into something that can actually they can use and hopefully even pay money for as part of solving their problems. And so when the opportunity for internships came about when I was in college, Microsoft was one of the companies that was at the career fair, and I sent my resume. And after multiple conversations, it all worked out. And so I got to intern at Microsoft, and I really enjoyed the more formal role of product manager that Microsoft was delivering, which was in this team called Developer Division, which is all about developers and platforms, which is an area that I really care a lot about. So there was both alignment in terms of what I enjoyed doing, but also my hobby and passion as well. So there was like a nice union in terms of like what I wanted to spend all my time doing. And that's how my PM journey began. I started working at Microsoft on a team that was building visual design tools for developers, making development easier, making it more friendly for those who think visually as opposed to more logically or abstractly, like you might be when writing code. And I spent many years at Microsoft, almost 11, I think,
Wow.
jumping through various teams. And as my scope increased, focusing on different parts of the problem, but I stayed pretty core to what I really cared about, which is developers and helping them be successful.
I see. And then were you in the same team in your internship as well?
No, I was not. The team I joined was just across the hall from where I interned. And so I will say the proximity played a big role, but the scope of the problem was more interesting in the team I ended up joining. And then I stayed there for a long time and then jumped across various parts of my org as the technology trends and my interests shifted a bit.
I see. And then as a PM, do you have to go into different products, rotate to a different products or different teams? Or do you basically work in the same team or same products for your entire 11 years?
You can pick and choose exactly what path you want to take and which products you want to focus on. In my case, I did shift teams a little bit. I stayed within a larger org because I wanted to stay with as close to developers as possible, but I jumped to various products just because of the different problems they're facing, and I wanted to learn something new as well because a big part of what I always enjoy doing is kind of going where I'm a little bit more uncomfortable or unknown territory for me so I can learn something new and then see how I can apply that to other things I might pursue in the future.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And then before I move on to another slide, I was looking at your profile picture. How did you create this? Like on the left.
I'm a big fan of pixel art. So for a long time, I've been doing pixel art on the side. But this one I did not create. I actually commissioned an artist who I've been following for a long time. He put up a request that said, I'm willing to create pixel art of your profile picture. If you're interested, contact me. And I did. And so it was basically created by an artist who's, I think his acronym is JMW. It's follow him on Twitter, and I can share that later if people are interested.
I see. Okay. My next question is, for a product manager, what's your duty? What's your responsibility? What does a PM responsible for?
I think that's it's a very broad question in terms of there are different kinds of PMs and what they focus on. But at a high level, the way I like to describe it is that there's often a case where you have an engineering team, the developers who are writing the
Yep.
code. You have a team that is often doing like the outbound marketing, the developer relations team, and all these various disciplines. In the end of the day, customers are, you're working for a company as a product manager, and there's a very good chance that the customer for that product is another human being, and they have problems, they have needs, they have organizational challenges, they have day-to-day challenges, and things that they're using your product for to help you solve them. And it's really the product manager's role to kind of identify what are the problems that people are having. How does it fit with the larger business objective? Like, what does their business exist? What is their goal? How can we align what the people are having difficulty with what we as a company are really good at, and come up with a package solution that really could be anything in terms of, like, it could be work that the engineering team does in terms of writing code to ship a new feature. If you're in a if you're in a non-technical product manager role, it could be coming up with a new way of, let's say, doing distribution of a product or a service. It could be a whole host of things. But in many ways, it's really the product manager's role to act as the glue between what customers are really interested in and translating that into requirements that different parts of your team will need to do their jobs effectively. So a lot of it is just kind of coming up with ideas. A lot of it is customer conversations and outreach, translating them. And then the other part is really the vision setting and also the execution part. Once you have narrowed down, here's what we're going to do, how do we translate that into steps that the team can take to get from a problem to a solution that someone can take and be like, yeah, this solves my problem very nicely. Thank you.
Gotcha. I see. So now I have two follow-up questions. So one is, you mentioned that PM have to be come up with ideas. So how did you generate or how did you come up with these ideas? And that's one question. The other one is, what departments or what people do you have to talk to execute this idea? For example, maybe software development team, or maybe marketing team, or maybe UI or UX design or anything. Could you elaborate that bit more?
Yep. The way to generate ideas oftentimes is there are many ways of doing this. And one of the best ways is to talk to people. Talk to enough people, you find themes and trends in terms of what is the problem they're having. And then the other part is talking to people within your team. There's a very good chance that if you're in a team that is very domain specific, in that it's not general, it's something that people choose to be in and have been in for a long time, you have a lot of subject matter experts that you can rely on in terms of your, getting feedback on some ideas, and also your broader network as well, being able to just reach out to someone and say, hey, I'm working on a problem like this. I hear you're good at this. Can we chat and get some ideas on terms of that? So definitely being creative is definitely a good goal. You don't want to be seen as the person who has to come with all the ideas on your own, but you definitely should take advantage of all the resources you have available to come up with the best idea. And sometimes it'll be an idea that you come up with, sometimes it'll be an idea that someone else comes up with, but the goal is collectively, what is the best solution we can provide for the user of our, the implementation of our idea that will be used to solve a particular problem. I will say that being a domain expert in your area helps a lot as well. And so I do spend a lot of time making sure that whatever team I'm on and whatever I'm working on, that I have a certain idea of how the customer is using the product, almost to the point where I'm familiar with the workflows they're talking about. So it's not a case where I'm completely, clueless in some ways when I'm chatting with someone. I can empathize with them. I can kind of understand that these are the pain points and be able to have a conversation with them in terms of, like, where are some of the other alternatives you can consider. So I do think there's an angle where relying on others and customer feedback is extremely valuable, but your own horsepower in being able to provide ideas and understand the domain space really well. I think that's a very critical part of success also.
I see. Now, for talking to the customer, like, did you have to talk to customer who are using the product? For example, like you mentioned, Firebase is kind of like the product that you're building at Google. So, do you have to reach out to people, or are they just sending feedback to you guys, and then you basically taking these feedback, analyze them? Like, what's the process look like to engage with the customer?
It depends entirely on what stage of the product or company you're currently in. And I joined Firebase about 6 months ago. It's a well-established product, very successful already. So in my case, it wasn't, me having to go out and spend an inordinate amount of time trying to find customers. Customers were already, using the product, and they
Yeah,
had things they were happy with and things that they wished we were doing better. And so it's really a case of like, who's the right customer we want to target for our long-term goals, and then chat with them and see what they want to do. But in other teams I had been a part of, it really was an incubation project or something. There was no established market or a product in that market. And in those cases, you have to kind of just start with, who do you think a relevant customer might be? And essentially, I wouldn't say cold call them directly, but it is very close to that, where you kind of don't know if they have an interest in it or not. And their
yeah,
willingness to say no is also equally as high. And so you have to just do the legwork of just trying to meet as many people as you can.
I see. And my other question is like, once you have the idea as a PM, like come up with this creative idea, how did you execute it? What's the process look like?
Yeah, it depends. It's often a case where many PMs have different various metrics on how they measure when an idea needs to be implemented and when we do further validation. And one of the things I often use is that, is the cost of being wrong with this idea going to be something we cannot recover from ever, or is it a small thing where it's probably faster and more efficient? Just go with the idea as we have it right now. Get a quick sandy check from your colleagues to make sure that this does sound right, and then implement it, and then see if it works or not in the market. And then if it doesn't work, it's okay. You didn't have to spend an inordinate amount of time to make it work. And so it's a case by case basis. So for things that involve a lot of work, and it might be something where we don't know, but it'll be a time, like a long time frame for commitment. There's UX research. There's a lot of extra validation we can do before even the first lines of code or large parts of the team are mobilized to make this work. But for some things that are much more minor, it may just be better to just be experiment. And a lot of this also has to do with the culture of the kind of company or team you're in as well. Some companies are very eager to try things out, ship it, see what happens. If it breaks, it's okay. We'll come back and we'll try something new. Others are more conservative, where very few things are shipped, and the things that are shipped are at a state where we are almost certain that it will have the intended impact, which has a lot of differences in terms of what product manager style you need to use and what kind of culture is defined at these organizations to make that kind of output happen.
I see. Got it. Now, my next question for you is, for as a PM, what's your daily or weekly routine looks like?
Yeah, it varies, entirely on what stage of the product you're currently in. There'll be times when you're trying to figure out what's the next big thing to work on a roadmap for a longer term vision, and that might involve a lot of meetings, a lot of validation, a lot of sort of stakeholders to both get their take and also oftentimes to present your point of view to see where they think the opportunity is or where there are gaps in your logic. So that's one part of it. And then the part where the team is already firing on cylinders, executing on the plan, the meetings are very different. It's going to be more tactical. It's going to be cases of, are we on the right path? Are we blocked on anything? And if we're blocked, how can I help unblock these situations? And then once the product is about to go to market, or in the process of being released, a lot of the activities will involve working with our various counterparts in marketing and developer relations, and the whole ecosystem of people like many companies have to market the product, have conferences, talk about it, blog posts, videos, the whole machinery around making sure that once we have something, people know about it, they see the value of it, and it's presented in a way that really drives home the solutions that we're providing.
I see. So it's very flexible. It changes, depends on the stages that the product is in.
Correct. Correct.
I see. Well, that's the fun part. All
Exactly.
right. So my next question is for product manager's career path. Let's say someone who gets to become a product manager. What are some paths that they can diverse into, or what are some career advancements that they can, get into? For example, senior product manager, or product leader, or vice president in some sort. Could you tell us a bit more about the career path?
Yep. The career paths often are very unique to every company. Some companies have a lot of fancy titles, other companies have no titles at all. And so the way you should really look at it is in terms of not necessarily titles, but in terms of scope and influence. As a product manager, when you first start out, you might be responsible for a particular product and you may be more focused on just execution, being able to, the problem space is reasonably well defined and you're just getting your footing on how do you navigate the conversations needed with various stakeholders, how do you work on prioritizing features and so on. And then as you become really good at it, as you become, as all these activities become more natural to you, your scope will undoubtedly increase, where you're looking at a series of products and a portfolio of products, and probably a product for a larger organization in terms where you are working with other product managers to make these things happen. And so the career path for a PM is entirely both based on the scope and how far you want to go in being able to influence the roadmap for a larger part of your team or company, but also based on your interests as well. Some product managers work, on the execution phase exclusively, and there are various roles in companies where they get to focus more on the release management, the more on the product execution, and more on that angle. And some product managers really enjoy the product strategy and the vision and being able to figure out what to do a year from now, 2 years from now, and 5 years from now. And there are also roles that are very exclusively designed to help a product manager in that particular career path be very successful as well. And then there are user experience product managers who spend a lot of time focusing on how do we bridge the gap between what a user sees and how they interact with the application, and how other disciplines in the background, like accessibility engineers and UX designers and front end and product engineers, how they all collaborate to make things work. And so in many ways, I like to describe the product manager career path as one of those choose your adventure books. Every career has some level of variability in how you start and how you might end. But I think the product manager role typically is the one that has, at least what I've seen, the most variability, where you can choose to be a PM and you can just do similar things for your entire career, or you can do some really go beyond what your typical role defines and have large scope, large influence. And oftentimes you do see that product managers tend to become the VPs and CEOs and co-founders of their companies or founders of their companies with another engineering manager, and do all these great things, partly because it's just one of those roles that requires you to wear many, many hats. And so you get an opportunity to kind of figure out which of the hats really fits you best, but also which of the things you're good at and what you're not good at, so you can complement that very nicely. So a little bit of survivorship bias there when you're observing product managers and the careers they have. But oftentimes I do think that there's a certain level of flexibility that product managers have, and a curiosity as well, that lends themselves really well to taking on challenges that may not be typical for other disciplines to really dive into.
I see. Now, speaking of wearing many hats, in a company as large as Google, do you wear many hats, or or does each product manager doing one specific thing?
Yeah, it varies depending on the style of the product manager you want to be. In my case, I like to wear many hats. I enjoy learning about every discipline, how they work, and what I can do to help them be successful. And a part of that kind of involves being involved in understanding how can I translate what I'm doing in a language or in a way that resonates the best with each kind of person I'm speaking with. And so for me, I enjoy wearing many hats, and if I wasn't wearing many hats, I'd probably be very, very bored.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Now, my other question here is, what are some pros and cons for being a PM? Like, what are some benefits and challenges for being a product manager?
Oh, but that's gonna take like several hours to fully go through actually. But I think if I had to pick the number one pro of being a PM is that it really gives you a bird's eye view of exactly how things get done in organizations. You get to see exactly how an idea goes from something that you think is worth working on to seeing it all the way end to end to it being released and reaching your customers' hands. And you get to dive deep into areas and then step back and get the bigger picture whenever you want. And that's a luxury that I think a product manager has that other disciplines don't really get to have, because the product manager does act as this kind of connective tissue between all the various disciplines in making sure the end result is something that was properly defined and properly delivered. And so that's one of the best things about being a product manager, is that you get like the ultimate documentary view of what goes on. But there's also the con sometimes, because in many ways there aren't too many people like a product manager to do all these activities. So even though you might be in a team of other product managers and you get to work on a similar area, in many ways, you're the only one who has to kind of be responsible for all these conversations and keeping keeping various parts of this operation working, which can also be one of those things where you can't really talk to someone else about it because the situation is so unique to every PM that you might have the same discipline, might even share the same organizational structure, but the things you deal with day in and day out are so unique to you, you might feel like you're the only one has to go through with this, which in some cases, it probably is you're the only one has to go through with this. So the con is that some of the camaraderie and some of the being able to relate to other PMs is often very difficult because it's so uniquely situational to every PM.
I see. I see. Now, my other question um, about this is that what's the difference between product manager and a program manager? How's it different?
Yep. It varies again by companies. There's a long time where Microsoft just had the title of program manager and product manager was marketing exclusively. And then the industry overall, and I think Silicon Valley and what was typically done there, the career paths, the titles sort of evolved a bit, where product manager became the kind of person who was in the engineering org, really defining the vision for the product, working with engineering, defining the deliverables and meeting customers. And then program manager evolved to be the role where you're responsible for large parts of the product, especially in communicating and organizing between various organizations and teams. So really doing the cross-functional work, which is very difficult and very challenging to do otherwise, and having one role handle both coordination of massive project management and other teams, as long as like holding the vision for a product was often tricky. And so those two roles became two separate ones, both with their own like really interesting and fascinating career tracks.